At first glance, Bruce Willis seems unbreakable. The man who ran through fire, walked through explosions, and carried Hollywood on his shoulders for nearly 4 decades. But today, the world is asking a question no one ever imagined we'd face this soon. Is Bruce Willis quietly saying goodbye? Because behind the headlines, behind the carefully worded family statements, behind the rare public appearances, there is a deeper, more human truth unfolding. A truth shaped not by fame or action hero mythology, but by the fragile reality every person faces when life delivers a blow that even strength can't outrun. In recent years, Bruce's diagnosis shook the world. Not because he was a star, but because he was Bruce, the man who made us cheer, laugh, hold our breath, and believe that heroes really do exist. And now, suddenly, those closest to him are protecting a chapter of his life more fiercely than any blockbuster script. People see photos, short clips, fragments of moments, but they don't see the private battles, the vulnerability, the shifting silence inside a family learning to navigate an unimaginable journey with the man they love. And the real question lingers. What is truly happening behind those closed doors? What does this goodbye really mean? And is it even a goodbye at all? Because Bruce Willis has always been more than the roles he played. And the story unfolding now, the one the public barely sees, may be the most powerful one of his life. This is the untold truth the world has been afraid to ask. To the world, Bruce Willis has always been the definition of cinematic toughness, the everyman hero who somehow rose above every impossible situation. Decade after decade, audiences watched him walk barefoot across broken glass, stare danger in the eye, and turn impossible odds into iconic moments burned into movie history. When people picture Bruce, they don't see weakness. They see a smirk, a sharp comeback, a fearless stride through chaos. They see John McClane, the man who never backed down. They see Butch Coolidge, the boxer who chose honor over escape. They see the charisma, the swagger, the effortless cool that made him one of Hollywood's most beloved legends. Even off-screen, Bruce carried a public presence built on confidence and warmth. There was always something approachable about him, a grounded, almost blue-collar energy that made millions believe he was one of them, just tougher, braver, louder. His interviews were quick-witted but never cruel. His smile could shift an entire room. And when he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because he felt real in a place where realness was rare. By the 1990s and early 2000s, Bruce wasn't just a movie star. He was global mythology. His face filled billboards, his films filled theaters, his catchphrases filled living rooms. He was part of a generation of action titans, but he stood apart because he wasn't sculpted or manufactured. He was raw charisma, unpolished power, a man who could balance vulnerability and heroism in a single glance. People admired him for his discipline, his work ethic, and the way he showed up, for crews, for co-stars, for fans. It was well known that Bruce rarely turned down a handshake, a photo, or a moment to talk. In every corner of Hollywood, people spoke about him the same way: tough, but kind, quick with a joke, loyal to his friends, protective of his family. And as his career matured, his image shifted from rising star to Hollywood elder statesman. Still formidable, still iconic, still adored. He became the symbol of a past era of filmmaking when stunts were real, heroes were flawed, and stories had grit. Younger actors looked up to him, older ones respected him. Directors called him reliable, focused, and sharp. Even as time passed and new stars took the stage, Bruce remained a fixture. The man whose shadow still stretched across modern action cinema. You couldn't talk about the genre without mentioning his name. You couldn't list iconic film moments without including him. His public image was carved in stone, and fans assumed it would stay that way forever. But then the headlines began to change. First quietly, then suddenly, people went from celebrating his legacy to worrying about his health. The man who always looked unstoppable began appearing less frequently. Rumors surfaced that didn't match the strong image everyone believed in. And for the first time, the world began to wonder, what happens when the hero the world depends on needs saving himself? Behind the cameras, behind the persona that defined an era, Bruce Willis was a man who carried more silence than most people ever realized. The public saw confidence, timing, charm. But privately, Bruce often protected a quieter, more introspective version of himself. A version that rarely made its way into late-night interviews or press tours. He was never the type to overshare. Not about fame, not about struggle, not about the weight that came with being one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Bruce treated vulnerability like a sacred thing, something to be shared only with the people who had earned a place inside his circle. Family, close friends, old collaborators. They knew a different Bruce. A man who worried more than he admitted. A man who felt deeply but spoke simply. A man whose strength was real, but whose heart was softer than anyone expected. He had always carried a quiet fear of losing control, not physically, but emotionally. The idea of letting the world see his insecurities was something he refused to accept. He played heroes because he understood them, but also because, deep down, he lived with the same vulnerabilities they tried to hide. In private moments, Bruce would sometimes retreat into thought. He never craved endless praise or constant attention. Fame wasn't fuel for him. It was a side effect of the work he loved. And even at the height of his success, he often craved the opposite of what the industry demanded. Calm, stillness, normalcy. There were days when he felt stretched thin by expectations, the pressure to remain invincible, the expectation to lead projects, the responsibility of carrying decades of success on his shoulders. Even those closest to him noticed a subtle tension whenever he stepped away from the set, as if he was trying to shed a layer of armor he had been wearing for too long. And Bruce had always cherished connection more than applause. His family, his daughters, the people he trusted, they were the anchors he leaned on long before the world knew anything was wrong. He didn't brag about them. He didn't parade them around. Instead, he protected them with the same determination he brought to every role. But over time, small shifts began to happen. Little things. Moments only a family notices. A memory missed. A conversation repeated. A hesitation where confidence used to be. At first, they were dismissed as exhaustion from nonstop filming. The man had spent decades sprinting through explosions, pushing his body, delivering performances back to back. Anyone would slow down. Anyone would forget things under that pressure. But eventually, those closest to him began recognizing a pattern. Something delicate, something fragile, something they couldn't explain away. And Bruce, who once carried the weight of every moment with unshakable presence, began facing a quiet internal struggle none of his characters had prepared him for. Behind his trademark half-smile, there was a growing uncertainty. One he didn't fully understand, and one he certainly didn't want the world to see. Long before Bruce Willis became a symbol of cinematic toughness, he was just a boy growing up in a world far removed from Hollywood's glow. His story didn't begin on red carpets or in spotlight interviews. It began in the quiet, ordinary corners of small-town life, where dreams feel distant and survival feels more urgent than fame. Bruce was born into a working-class family, the kind where every dollar mattered and every effort counted. His father was a soldier turned mechanic. His mother worked in a bank. They weren't wealthy, but they were tight-knit, grounded, and protective. From the beginning, Bruce learned the value of grit, not the Hollywood kind, but the real kind that helps a kid get through hard days and tougher nights. School wasn't easy for him. He struggled with a stutter, one that sometimes froze his voice mid-sentence. To classmates, it made him an easy target. But for Bruce, it became the first challenge that would quietly shape the man he'd become. What most people never knew is how deeply it affected him. The frustration, the embarrassment, the way words caught in his throat while his thoughts raced ahead. It created moments of isolation, but also moments of determination. Bruce wasn't the kind of kid to quit, not even then. And in a strange twist that would change everything, he discovered something almost miraculous. When he stepped on stage, the stutter disappeared. It was theater that gave him his first taste of freedom, a space where he could speak, express, be bold, be loud. Acting wasn't a career at that point. It was a lifeline, a place where he didn't have to fight his own voice just to be understood. By high school, Bruce was already showing signs of the charisma the world would later fall in love with. Not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because he was finally comfortable in his own skin. He joined drama clubs, performed in small productions, and slowly grew into himself. Not through fame, but through the tiny victories that told him he was capable of more. After school, life didn't hand him shortcuts. He worked as a security guard, a factory worker, a private investigator, a bartender. He poured drinks at night to pay rent, listened to strangers' stories, and built the raw, observational understanding of humanity that would later give his characters depth. People liked him, trusted him. He had a charm that felt unforced, the kind that came from someone who had seen enough struggle to stay grounded. But even with all the side jobs, Bruce didn't let go of the dream forming in the back of his mind. He enrolled in acting classes, auditioned endlessly, chased every opportunity, large or small. New York City became his training ground. Harsh, unforgiving, but full of the energy he needed to sharpen his craft. He took every rejection personally, not in bitterness, but in motivation. Each no reminded him why he started. Each setback hardened his resolve. The stutter that once held him back had now transformed into the fire pushing him forward. And beneath the surface of his rising confidence, one truth remained constant. Bruce Willis wasn't born an action hero. He wasn't handed success. He wasn't destined for Hollywood greatness. He built himself, piece by piece, from every struggle, every odd job, every moment of insecurity he refused to surrender to. Every great career has a single moment, a spark, when years of struggle, doubt, and invisible effort suddenly collide with opportunity. For Bruce Willis, that moment didn't arrive quietly. It burst open a door he had been knocking on for years, and it changed the trajectory of his life forever. It began in New York, long before the world knew his name. Bruce had been hustling through auditions, scraping by with bartending shifts, and performing in small theater productions that paid more in experience than in dollars. He wasn't looking for stardom. He was looking for survival. But somewhere between the late nights and early mornings, something was forming. A presence, a confidence, a spark that casting directors couldn't ignore forever. The first real shift happened in the unlikeliest of places. A crowded, noisy bar in the heart of the city. Bruce was behind the counter, serving drinks with that same effortless charisma Hollywood would one day pay millions for. He flirted playfully, joked with strangers, and moved with a natural rhythm that turned the bar into his stage. Customers weren't just buying drinks. They were buying the experience of being around him. And one night, someone important noticed. A casting director, watching him command the room without trying. Watching him handle chaos with charm. Watching him improvise, entertain, and connect with people like it was second nature. It wasn't a formal audition, but it didn't need to be. Bruce Willis was performing, simply by being himself. That encounter led to new auditions, new doors, new possibilities. But the true spark came with a project no one expected to change television forever. Moonlighting. When Bruce walked into that audition room, he wasn't the industry's first choice. He wasn't polished, he wasn't traditionally glamorous, and he didn't fit the typical leading man mold. But the moment he opened his mouth, confident, unfiltered, bold, everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something different. He wasn't acting. He was living the character. The chemistry was instant. The timing was razor sharp. The energy was unlike anything television had seen. Bruce got the part, and the world got introduced to David Addison, a wisecracking detective whose blend of humor and charm would redefine the television landscape. Moonlighting became a sensation, a show that pushed creative boundaries and turned its stars into household names. And for Bruce, it was more than a job. It was validation. It was proof that the years of pouring drinks, swallowing rejections, and believing in something the world couldn't yet see had been worth it. The spark didn't just ignite his career. It ignited a new kind of star. Someone unpredictable, someone electrifying, someone real. But the biggest spark of all was still coming. a moment that would launch him off television screens and into cinematic history, placing him in a role that would define a generation and cement his place among Hollywood legends. Hollywood is full of actors who wait their whole lives for a defining moment, a single role that lifts them from the crowd and stamps their name into cinematic history. For Bruce Willis, that moment arrived with a script no one expected him to lead, and a role that would forever reshape the action genre. When the studio first searched for the star of Die Hard, Bruce wasn't even on the shortlist. He was the funny, charming TV guy. Successful, yes, but not the kind of actor executives imagined running barefoot through exploding buildings. They wanted established action titans, men already built like machines and branded as unstoppable heroes. Bruce? He was different. Smaller, wittier, more human. And that was exactly why the world would fall in love with him. When Bruce finally landed the role of John McClane, it didn't feel like destiny. It felt like a long shot, a gamble, a risk. Even the studio wasn't convinced. They marketed the film cautiously, hiding his face on posters, unsure if audiences would accept a TV star as the next big action hero. But the moment cameras rolled, something extraordinary happened. Bruce didn't play McClane like an invincible warrior. He played him like a regular man pushed into impossible circumstances, scared, sweating, bleeding, hurting, yet refusing to give up. He brought humor where others would have brought force. He delivered vulnerability in moments where other heroes would have flexed. He made every scene feel human, grounded, and painfully real. Audiences didn't just watch him. They rooted for him. They felt him. They recognized themselves in him. Die Hard wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural detonation. A new kind of action hero had been born, and he looked nothing like the muscle-bound giants of the decade. He looked like Bruce Willis, sarcastic, flawed, stubborn, resilient, unforgettable. Suddenly, Hollywood wasn't questioning him anymore. They were chasing him. Blockbuster offers poured in. Sequels exploded into existence. Bruce became a global superstar overnight, with his name lighting up marquees from Los Angeles to Tokyo. He went from bartending in dim corners of New York to leading multi-million-dollar films across the world. But his breakthrough wasn't defined by just one role. Films like Pulp Fiction, 12 Monkeys, The Fifth Element, Armageddon, and The Sixth Sense showcased a range few actors could match. Bruce wasn't trapped in one genre. He leapt between them effortlessly: drama, comedy, sci-fi, thrillers. Each performance carried the same authenticity that first made audiences believe in him. He wasn't pretending to be a hero. He was a human being who happened to play heroes. And that rawness became his signature. As the years passed, Bruce carved out a legacy built on versatility and longevity. He could headline massive action blockbusters and then deliver delicate emotional performances that struck deeper than anyone expected. Directors trusted him. Co-stars admired him. Fans adored him. The breakthrough wasn't just a career shift. It was a transformation. A moment when a man who once struggled to speak found a voice so powerful it echoed across generations. But success always carries a cost. And as Bruce's star rose higher and higher, the pressure intensified. The workload grew, the expectations doubled, and somewhere beneath the applause, a quiet storm was forming, one that neither Bruce nor the world could see coming. At the height of his fame, Bruce Willis stood on a summit few actors ever reach. A place where every studio wanted him, every director respected him, and every audience believed in him. This was the era often called the Willis crown, a stretch of time where Bruce wasn't just a star. He was the star, a global force, a cultural cornerstone. By the mid-90s and early 2000s, Bruce Willis had become the face of a new cinematic era. His films dominated summers, shaped box office records, and influenced a generation of young actors who studied his timing, presence, and natural charisma. He didn't have to force anything. He didn't have to posture or inflate his ego. Bruce carried his crown with a simplicity that made him even more magnetic. Every premiere became an event. Every blockbuster became a statement. Every role was a reminder of why the world couldn't look away. Audiences loved him because he never played perfect heroes. He played humans. Flawed, scared, stubborn, hopeful, angry, protective. Characters who bled, joked, cried, doubted, and still fought for something bigger than themselves. Bruce brought layers to roles that were often written as straightforward. He found the soul in the spectacle. Behind the scenes, the industry treated him like royalty. Producers called him a guarantee. Crew members said he was a leader. Directors admired his instincts, the way he could shift from a tense stare to a perfectly timed joke in one breath. And yet, despite the fame, Bruce never fully lost the bartender energy that once defined him. He joked with grips, talked casually with extras, and treated the set like a family gathering rather than a hierarchy. That humility, that relatability, became part of the crown he wore. It humanized him in a way few megastars managed to maintain. But with the crown came the weight. Bruce pushed himself through grueling schedules. 2 films a year, sometimes 3, massive stunts, long shoots, worldwide press tours, endless interviews. From the outside, it looked like a dream. From the inside, it was pressure few people could ever understand. He was aging, but Hollywood wouldn't let him slow down. Every new hit created a new expectation. Every great performance raised the bar higher. And Bruce, relentless as ever, kept meeting those expectations, even when exhaustion crept into the edges of his life. There were moments, small, fleeting, when those closest to him noticed his energy shift. He would forget a detail he once knew, lose track of a conversation, repeat a line he had already said. Nothing alarming at first, nothing that signaled the storm ahead. Just tiny fractures in the armor of a man everyone thought was indestructible. But during the height of his reign, nobody imagined these were early signs of something deeper. Something that would one day force Bruce Willis, the man who had outrun villains, asteroids, monsters, and impossible odds, to face a fight no script could ever prepare him for. Still, during this era, Bruce stood tall. A king of cinema, a legend in real time, a man whose presence shaped an entire generation of storytelling. But every crown has a price, and Bruce, unknowingly, had already begun to pay it. Every legendary career has a hidden cost, a toll taken quietly, slowly, invisibly over years of pushing, performing, and carrying expectations heavier than any action sequence. For Bruce Willis, that cost didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in softly, almost politely, the way real-life battles often do. Not with explosions, but with whispers. As Bruce moved deeper into his career, his workload didn't slow. If anything, it multiplied. He became the go-to star for studios that needed intensity, reliability, and the unmistakable presence only he could bring. Directors praised his discipline, producers praised his consistency, audiences praised his longevity. But behind the glowing reviews and record-breaking films, Bruce was pushing himself far beyond the limits most people ever imagined. Long shooting days blurred into long nights. Press tours drained his energy. Back-to-back projects left little room for rest. He was aging, gracefully, yes. But Hollywood doesn't age with its actors. The machine kept moving, and Bruce kept moving with it, determined to carry the same fire he had in his 30s, even as his body and mind hinted that they needed something else. Time. Privately, family members began seeing small changes, moments of confusion, lines that needed repeating, pauses that felt unfamiliar. Friends saw it too. Not in dramatic moments, but in the subtle ones. A forgotten appointment, a name that slipped away, a sentence that wandered before finding its end. In an industry built on memorization, precision, and emotional clarity, these tiny cracks meant something different. They weren't just signs of stress. They weren't just aging. They were signals, faint but persistent, that something deeper might be happening. But Bruce, ever the fighter, pushed through. He took roles that demanded less verbal complexity, but still allowed him to do what he loved: He relied more on instinct, more on presence, more on the natural charisma that had always been his gift. And for a while, it worked. Audiences barely noticed anything had changed. The legend still showed up. The icon still shined. Yet, behind the scenes, those closest to him were carrying a growing worry. His team began protecting him more actively. Scripts were adjusted. Schedules were shortened. Entire productions were built around giving Bruce enough support to continue working without the world noticing the truth behind the curtain. And still, he wouldn't stop. He loved acting too much. He loved storytelling too much. He loved connecting with fans too much. But passion can sometimes push a person beyond what their own body can handle. And for Bruce, the cost of decades spent giving everything to his craft was becoming impossible to ignore. Eventually, the signs grew too loud, too frequent, too undeniable. His memory, his clarity, his communication, his sense of ease, the very tools that had built his extraordinary career were now becoming the center of concern, not because of failure, but because of something no actor can outrun. Fame couldn't shield him. Strength couldn't fight it. And even the hero millions adored was forced to slow down. Bruce's family confronted the truth before the world did. They stepped in, gently and lovingly, knowing that something serious was unfolding. Something that required care, unity, and protection. The price of glory had finally revealed itself, not as punishment, but as reality, and with it came the beginning of a chapter no one was prepared to face. A chapter where the man who once saved worlds on screen now needed the world around him to hold him steady. There comes a moment in every life, even in the life of a legend, when the truth can no longer be held back. For Bruce Willis, that moment didn't arrive with a single dramatic event. It wasn't a collapse, a crisis, or a sudden turning point. His fall was quieter, gentler, but infinitely more heartbreaking. It began with confusion on set, small hesitations, moments where the sharp timing that once defined him slipped away. Directors noticed. Crew members whispered. Lines that Bruce once delivered effortlessly suddenly felt heavy, scattered, elusive. Scripts were shortened. Dialogues were simplified. Scenes were restructured around him. Everyone tried to shield him, not out of pity, but out of love and respect. Bruce wasn't just a co-worker, he was a legacy. No one wanted the world to see the shift before he was ready. But even with the support, the changes were undeniable. There were days when Bruce looked lost, not in character, but in reality. Days when he asked the same question twice. Days when he seemed present physically but distant mentally. Days when the weight of the moment fell heavier on his family than on him. His team, people who had worked with him for years, even decades, carried a quiet grief. They knew what was happening. They saw it coming long before the public ever did. And the hardest part wasn't the decline itself. It was watching Bruce, who had spent his entire life portraying strength, now struggling with something profoundly human, profoundly vulnerable. At home, things were even more difficult. The man who had always been the protector, the pillar, the anchor of his family now needed reassurance. His daughters held his hand more. His loved ones spoke softer. They adapted their world to accommodate his. Everyday moments became emotional tests, conversations that drifted off, memories that disappeared, moments that felt like they were slipping through time. Bruce felt it too. He knew something was wrong. He sensed the change long before the diagnosis was spoken aloud. There was frustration in his eyes at times, a kind of silent battle between mind and memory. But there were also moments of calm acceptance, as if some part of him understood that he couldn't fight this one the way he fought everything else. And then came the day everything changed. The official diagnosis, aphasia, a language disorder that affects communication, a word that carried more weight than any script he had ever read. The news hit his family with the force of truth, painful, undeniable, irreversible. The world would later call it tragic, but for the people who loved him most, it was something deeper, a shift in reality, a redefining of the man they knew, a new chapter they never expected to face. Hollywood learned about it much later, but behind closed doors, Bruce's inner circle had already begun preparing. Not for an ending, but for a transition, for a life where Bruce would no longer chase cameras and lines, but moments of peace, stillness, and connection. And then came the public announcement. The moment the world realized the hero was stepping away. Fans across the globe felt the news like a blow to the chest. Tributes poured in, old clips resurfaced. People shared memories, quotes, scenes, moments that defined their childhoods. Bruce Willis wasn't just retiring. He was saying goodbye to the craft that shaped his entire life. But even in this fall, there was dignity. There was love. There was unity. The world didn't watch a star fade. It watched a family rise around him, holding him with the same strength he had shown them for years. And yet, this was not the end of Bruce's story. Not the final chapter. Not the legacy he would leave behind. Because in the silence that followed his fall, something powerful began to take shape. A return, not to the screen, but to the heart of what truly mattered. There is a certain kind of silence that fills a home when the world is kept outside. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of protection, of a family trying to hold on to what is slipping through their fingers. In Bruce Willis's house, that silence had become the quiet heartbeat of daily life. Not heavy, not sad, just tender, as if every moment needed to be handled with both hands. Inside those walls, time didn't follow the rest of the world. It didn't rush. It didn't demand. It flowed softly around Bruce, around his daughters, around Emma, around Demi, around everyone who had stepped into this intimate season with him. Every person understood, often without words, that these were the moments that would eventually become stories held in their chests. Stories they would tell quietly, carefully, maybe even tearfully. Bruce's diagnosis had not stolen his identity. It had not taken the weight of his legacy, but it had changed the shape of the way life moved around him. And as the conditions slowly rearranged the landscape of his memory, the people who loved him began doing something they were never trained to do. They learned how to say their goodbyes in pieces. The goodbyes didn't look like endings. They looked like presents. They looked like sitting on the couch beside him, even if he didn't say much. They looked like holding his hand when he stared a little too long at nothing. They looked like laughing at jokes he didn't finish. They looked like reminding him, not forcing him, to feel safe. Rumor was the first to understand that time had changed. She noticed how moments that once passed casually now held weight. She found herself memorizing the texture of her father's voice, even when it was quiet. She studied the way his eyes softened when he saw her baby. She looked at him the way you look at a sunset when you know it will disappear behind the horizon. Slowly, gratefully, with a quiet ache. Scout took it differently. She had always been the artistic soul, the observer. Her way of saying goodbye was capturing pieces of him in photographs, the curve of his smile, the way his hands rested on the table, the warmth in his posture when he watched his family. She took pictures not to remember him as he was losing pieces of himself, but to remember the feeling of being near him. Her camera stays still. Her heart did not. Tallulah, who had always worn her emotions openly, found herself stepping into the role of the emotional translator. She was the one who could sit with him during the quiet, difficult hours. She could sense the moments when frustration rose in him, even when he didn't express it. She became his calm, the soft bridge between confusion and comfort. She did not say goodbye with tears. She said goodbye with courage, by being the person who could stand still when the room felt unsteady. And then there was Emma. She carried the weight no one else could see. The quiet responsibilities, the paperwork, the routines, the late-night research, the medical conversations done behind closed doors. She held Bruce's world together with a strength that did not break. Her goodbye was the hardest, because it wasn't a goodbye at all. It was a daily act of love, the kind that doesn't fade when the lights are off, the kind that doesn't ask for recognition, Every night she checked the doors. Every morning she adjusted the routine. Every hour she measured the energy in the room. But through it all, she never once allowed grief to swallow her presence. She stayed beside him, not as a caretaker, though she was one, but as the woman he had chosen, the partner who was determined to make this chapter gentle. And then, of course, Demi. Her presence was unexpected at first to the outside world, but not to the family. She had known Bruce longer than anyone else in the room. Their lives had grown apart on paper, but not in the ways that mattered. Her goodbye was rooted in memory, decades of shared history, laughter, misunderstandings, healing, and eventual peace. She didn't hover. She didn't take space. She simply sat with him like someone who knew his soul well enough to recognize what words might confuse him and what silence might soothe him. Together, they formed a circle around him, a circle that felt like protection, like legacy, like devotion. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't talk about the timeline. They talked about the present because that was what Bruce had. And they embraced it. Some days Bruce was himself. He smiled with his entire face. He cracked a half joke. He asked simple questions that carried the warmth of familiarity. He held his granddaughter with the same gentleness he once used to hold scripts. On those days, hope swelled in everyone's chest, even if they knew better than to expect consistency. The good days were gifts, unexpected, unplanned, precious. Other days, he drifted. He walked slower. He stared longer. He responded less. He needed more. And that was the part the public didn't see. The part hidden from cameras. The part that made the family close their circle tighter. This wasn't tragedy. It was transition. The kind of transition the world often misunderstands until they experience it themselves. One afternoon, while the winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, Bruce sat in the living room, holding a small wooden box in his hands. It was something he hadn't touched in years, a box filled with old notes, backstage photos, scribbled jokes, and small keepsakes from his earliest days as an actor. No one knew how he found it. No one knew what drew him to it. But he opened the box slowly, like someone searching for a memory they weren't sure they still owned. Inside, he found a photograph. A young version of himself, leaning against a trailer door, wearing a grin full of unfiltered confidence. It was a smile from the era before fame had weight, before responsibility carved lines into his face, before the world learned his name. He stared at that picture for a long moment. Then he whispered, barely audible, "Hey, kid." No one in the room breathed. No one spoke. No one moved. It was one of those rare moments where clarity broke through like sunlight slicing through morning fog. A moment where Bruce's voice didn't belong to the present. It belonged to the man he once was, the man he still carried somewhere inside him. He gently placed the photograph on the table, and although he said nothing else, the room felt full of meaning. As if he was saying goodbye not only to the world he had entertained, but to the man who once sprinted through action scenes, delivered punchlines effortlessly, and brought characters to life with grit and humor. That moment told everyone in the room what they already knew, but rarely allowed themselves to feel. Bruce was transitioning, not leaving, not fading, just slowly stepping back from the noise of the world and deeper into the safety of his family. And this chapter, this slow, quiet chapter, was their chance to walk beside him. The goodbyes continued, not dramatic, not spoken, but lived. A hand held a little longer, a photo taken without saying why, a walk through the garden even if it took more time. A playlist of his old favorites played softly in the background. A whispered, "I'm here," even when he didn't ask. They weren't grieving a loss. They were honoring a presence. And every person in that home understood something profound. You don't say goodbye to someone like Bruce Willis in a single moment. You say goodbye in memories, in gestures, in love, in silence, in the spaces between breaths. Because the truth was simple and painful and beautiful. He was still here. He was still theirs. And until the days shifted into something gentler, something quieter, they would hold him, fully, tenderly, completely. This was the season of private goodbyes. and every one of them was an act of love. Every story of struggle has a moment of return, a point where the shadows lift, where the heart finds strength again, and where life reclaims its rhythm, even if it looks different than before. For Bruce Willis, that return was never about screens or scripts. It wasn't about action sequences, red carpets, or box office numbers. It was about something far more enduring: connection, presence, and rediscovering the life that fame had always allowed him to live, quietly, in fragments. The return began not in headlines, not on television, not in a press release, but in the subtle rhythms of daily life. Slowly, deliberately, Bruce started showing up in moments that mattered. Not because the world demanded it, not because cameras captured it, but because he wanted to be part of the life around him, fully, visibly, authentically. It started with small routines. Breakfast with his family. Conversations that lasted longer than usual, without interruptions. Playing with grandchildren, watching them run through yards, laugh without care, and creating an energy that filled the house with warmth. Bruce's laughter returned, soft but unmistakable, carrying the echoes of the man everyone remembered. Not the action hero, but the father, the partner, the grandfather, the man who could still move a room with a smile. Even in moments of difficulty, there was progress. His team worked to adapt his environment. Scripts were simplified when he chose to return to minor projects. Daily schedules were adjusted, and tasks were broken into pieces that allowed him to succeed without frustration. But the most important element of his return wasn't professional, it was personal. His family became the anchor that reminded him of the joy in being present. And Bruce, resilient as ever, met that anchor with gratitude and determination. Publicly, the world saw little at first. Appearances were scarce, interviews rare, and statements brief. But when Bruce did emerge, sometimes a simple stroll, a quiet acknowledgement, a smile at a charity event, it carried weight. The small glimpses were enough to remind the world that Bruce Willis, though altered, was still there, still part of the story, still alive in the moments that mattered. In these years, the return was not linear. It had peaks and valleys. Some days were brighter, filled with clarity and ease. Other days returned reminders of the challenges he faced. Aphasia did not vanish. Words could still escape him. Sentences could fracture. Memories could drift. But even those difficult days were framed by love, compassion, and a deep sense of belonging. Bruce learned to navigate the world differently, slower, intentionally, and with an understanding that control could be shared. His daughters played a critical role in this new rhythm. They became guides, advocates, and companions. With patience, they adjusted their lives to meet his, creating a shared language of gestures, glances, and small words that made communication possible even when speech faltered. Bruce, in turn, discovered new ways to express himself, through smiles, through laughter, through touch, and through the quiet presence that had always been part of his charm. The words may have slowed, but the connection remained unstoppable. Bruce also found a new relationship with the world of acting, one that was neither about obligation nor ambition. He began accepting projects that spoke to him emotionally rather than commercially, roles that allowed him to explore his craft without the pressure of perfection. Directors learned to adapt their approaches, working closely with him to ensure that every performance maintained authenticity while respecting his limitations. These were collaborations built on trust and respect, highlighting the man behind the legend rather than the superhero on screen. Interestingly, this period became one of immense reflection for Bruce. Freed, in some ways, from the relentless demand of Hollywood, he turned inward. He revisited scripts that had shaped his career, rewatched performances, and pondered the choices that had defined his life. In conversations with close friends, he spoke about legacy, not fame or money, but the lasting impact of love, kindness, and presence. He spoke of family, of mistakes, of triumphs that had little to do with the cameras. This reflection, often private, gave him a sense of completion and peace few outsiders could ever witness. But the return wasn't solely domestic or personal. Bruce also rediscovered the joys of connection with fans in a measured way. Letters, social media tributes, and rare meet and greets became moments of genuine exchange. Fans didn't just see an actor, they saw the human who had once been larger than life, now sharing a fragment of his vulnerability. The gratitude was mutual. Bruce recognized the devotion and loyalty of people who had grown up with his films, who had laughed, cried, and held their breath alongside him. These interactions reminded him that even in retreat, his presence mattered. Philanthropy also became a central part of this new chapter. Bruce quietly increased involvement in charitable efforts, supporting causes related to health, children, and creative arts. He rarely sought acknowledgement. There were no press releases, no headlines, only the steady act of giving. This work allowed him to channel energy into something tangible, meaningful, and enduring. Friends and family noticed how these acts not only helped others, but also infused Bruce with purpose and joy. Despite the challenges, Bruce's spirit, tempered by years of experience, strengthened by adversity and softened by vulnerability, continued to inspire. His laughter returned in fits and starts, sometimes catching everyone in the room by surprise. Moments of clarity could shift an entire conversation from routine to remarkable. And while he no longer sprinted across rooftops or delivered explosive one-liners with ease, he embraced a different kind of performance. The performance of life, presence, and love. Every family meal, every shared glance, every quiet joke became a milestone. These ordinary moments took on extraordinary meaning because the fragility of life had made them sacred. Bruce discovered that returning didn't mean going back to what once was. It meant moving forward with intention, gratitude, and presence. His family became not just his support, but his collaborators in this ongoing journey of rediscovery. Public perception began to shift subtly. Observers noticed the calm dignity with which Bruce approached this chapter of life. Media coverage, once filled with speculation and concern, began to highlight resilience and love. Tributes focused not on loss, but on the enduring strength and humanity of a man who had given everything to his craft and to his family. Bruce's return became a lesson in grace under pressure, reminding the world that legacy isn't solely built on films or accolades, but on the quiet courage to continue when life demands reinvention. Even his closest colleagues noted the change. Friends in the industry spoke privately about how his energy had shifted, not diminished but redirected. Bruce was no longer chasing the demands of Hollywood. Instead, he was embracing a rhythm defined by relationships, meaning, and self-awareness. This was a triumph that no stunt, no blockbuster, no award could ever equal. It was the triumph of presence. As years passed, Bruce's return deepened. His family learned to communicate with him in nuanced ways that allowed him to remain fully engaged. He began documenting small moments in journals and photographs, creating private keepsakes for future generations. These were acts of intentionality, a conscious effort to leave not only a career legacy, but also an intimate, enduring record of his presence and love. In quiet afternoons, he would sit in the sun with his grandchildren, telling stories, sometimes accurate, sometimes whimsical, but always alive with warmth. These moments became the pulse of his new life. They were reminders that a return doesn't require regaining everything lost. It only requires embracing what remains, nurturing it, and letting it grow. Through all of this, Bruce taught those around him a subtle but profound lesson. Life's greatest return isn't about reclaiming the past. It's about discovering meaning in the present, cherishing the ordinary, and allowing love to define legacy rather than fame. The man who once ran through explosions, defied villains, and saved the world on screen now demonstrated that courage can be quiet, resilience can be tender, and impact can be felt without fanfare. And in that quiet victory, Bruce's story came full circle. From the struggles of youth, the triumphs of breakthrough, the burdens of fame, the challenges of decline, to this deliberate, loving return, he had navigated a journey few could imagine. And yet, he had emerged not as a diminished star, but as a fully realized human being whose strength had never truly been measured by his on-screen feats, but by the love, patience, and presence he embodied every day. The return, in the truest sense, wasn't about public applause or recognition. It was about life reclaimed, moments embraced, connections deepened, and legacy quietly nurtured within the hearts of those who loved him most. Bruce Willis had returned, not to the stage of Hollywood, but to the stage of life, and in doing so reminded the world that the truest victories are those lived in silence, love, and unwavering presence. Legacy is an elusive thing. It is often measured by accolades, box office numbers, or critical acclaim. But the true legacy, the one that endures beyond the cameras, beyond the awards, beyond the bright lights of Hollywood, is always more profound. For Bruce Willis, that legacy is not just in the characters he portrayed, the explosions he survived on screen, or the punchlines he delivered with perfect timing. His legacy lies in the authenticity, resilience, and humanity he carried throughout a life lived in both extraordinary and ordinary moments. From the very beginning, Bruce was different from the archetype of a Hollywood hero. He wasn't born into fame or privilege. He didn't inherit connections that guaranteed success. He fought for every opportunity, from bartending in New York to waiting tables between auditions, to performing in small theater productions that gave him practice but no spotlight. That perseverance, the quiet, persistent determination to pursue what he loved, formed the foundation of his legacy long before anyone saw him on a screen. When Bruce first appeared in Moonlighting, the world saw charisma, wit, and an effortless charm. But those who truly knew him understood the discipline, the vulnerability, and the humanity that powered that performance. He didn't just play David Addison. He gave life to someone audiences could believe in, someone who felt real, someone whose flaws made him relatable. That authenticity became his signature. It became a standard for the kind of hero the world would come to love. Not invincible, not unflawed, but resilient, witty, and deeply human. His breakthrough with Die Hard redefined an entire genre. Hollywood had long been populated by muscular, stoic action stars. Bruce brought something different, a vulnerability beneath the bravado, humor beneath the danger, humanity beneath the heroism. John McClane became the everyman hero. People didn't just watch him, they related to him. They saw themselves in him. That resonance is rare, and it is a hallmark of enduring impact. Bruce didn't just entertain. He connected. He reminded audiences that heroism isn't the absence of fear, it's facing fear with courage and heart. Over decades, Bruce's films became a tapestry of versatility. From intense dramas like 12 Monkeys to family adventures like The Sixth Sense, from comedic turns to high-octane thrillers, he navigated genres effortlessly. But more than the films themselves, it was the consistency of his approach that set him apart. Bruce brought the same dedication, the same authenticity, the same humanity to every role, regardless of scale or expectation. That dedication, often invisible to the casual viewer, is the cornerstone of a legacy that doesn't fade with time. Yet his legacy is not only cinematic, it is deeply personal. The way he has approached life, even amid profound challenges, speaks volumes. When faced with the diagnosis that would change his life, Bruce's response was defined not by despair, but by courage, grace, and an unwavering commitment to the people he loved. He stepped back from the screen not out of defeat, but out of devotion to himself, to his family, and to the life that mattered most. That courage, quiet as it may be, becomes part of the story people remember far longer than any role. Within his family, Bruce's legacy is tangible. His daughters, his grandchildren, and those closest to him carry forward the lessons he imparted not with lectures, but with presence, resilience in the face of challenge, humor in the face of stress, and love even when circumstances are difficult. He showed that a true hero doesn't always fight battles in front of the world. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in living rooms, on quiet walks, or in moments of vulnerability shared between people who matter. Bruce also leaves an indelible mark on his peers and collaborators. Directors, co-stars, and crew members speak not only of his talent, but of his professionalism, empathy, and respect for everyone on set. He treated assistants and extras with the same consideration he offered to leading co-stars. He showed that legacy is not just what you achieve, it is how you achieve it. It is the kindness, integrity, and reliability you carry with you while creating your work. In Hollywood, where fame often breeds distance, Bruce's authenticity became a model for what true leadership looks like. His philanthropic efforts, too, are part of his enduring mark. From charitable contributions to quiet advocacy, Bruce has supported causes without fanfare, demonstrating that impact is often strongest when it is sincere, personal, and consistent. His approach is a testament to the idea that a life well lived is measured not only by professional success, but by the difference one makes in the lives of others, quietly and steadfastly. The public will always remember Bruce Willis for his films, the action sequences, the dramatic moments, the comedic timing, but those who truly understand his legacy know that it is deeper. It is in the relationships he nurtured, the risks he embraced, the authenticity he maintained, and the courage he displayed when facing challenges that no audience could ever script. His legacy is a lesson in resilience, humility, and presence, showing that even in decline, even in struggle, life can still be lived fully and with dignity. Bruce's story also serves as a reminder of the fragility and beauty of life. Fame and talent may shine brightly, but they do not shield anyone from the human challenges that define existence. His response to adversity, his patience, his courage, his grace, transcends Hollywood. It becomes universal. It becomes something people can learn from, something they can carry into their own lives. It is proof that legacy is not only about what you leave behind in the world, but about how you navigate the journey of life itself. Looking back, Bruce Willis's legacy is multifaceted. It is cinematic, yes, but it is also personal, ethical, and human. It encompasses decades of work that redefined genres, but also decades of love, resilience, and quiet leadership. It shows that a life lived with authenticity, courage, and devotion, both on and off the screen, can leave an imprint far greater than the sum of its achievements. And while the world may remember the stunts, the one-liners, and the larger-than-life heroism, those closest to him will remember the quiet evenings, the soft smiles, the hand-holding, the shared laughter, and the unwavering presence. That is the enduring legacy, a life that touched millions through art, but shaped its deepest meaning in love, family, and authenticity. In the end, Bruce Willis's story is more than the sum of his films or accolades. It is a portrait of resilience, human connection, and courage in every form. It is proof that true greatness does not always roar on the screen. It whispers in moments of vulnerability, it shines through acts of love, and it endures long after the credits roll. Bruce's legacy is permanent, not because of the explosions he survived or the characters he played, but because he lived fully, loved fiercely, and faced life's challenges with grace and dignity. Bruce Willis leaves behind more than a career. He leaves behind an example. That life, in all its beauty and fragility, is a story worth telling, worth living, and worth cherishing. His films will entertain generations to come, but his life, his courage, and his love will inspire generations to come. That is the legacy of Bruce Willis, a man who became more than a hero on screen, and a hero in life. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Talksberry and comment. Remember, greatness isn't in the spotlight, but in the struggle behind it.